for an Ask Me Anything session with Nancy Wang, who is the founder of Advancing Women in Tech and is also the Director of Product and Engineering at Amazon Web Services. Many of you may know her as the instructor of the Real World Product Management courses on Coursera. And we have set up this call today as an opportunity to have a frank discussion about how you can go ahead and impress people as you are looking for your next role in product management. So for a few little housekeeping things, many of you, when you registered for this session, sent in questions in advance. So I'll be going ahead and asking those first, but we also have enabled the chat box. Go ahead, and if you have any questions as you're coming in, send them to me and I'll be able to ask them of Nancy. How does that sound? Well, I'm going to take that as a +1. All right. So Nancy, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that we can just look and have a conversation together.
Awesome. Sounds good. And thank you all for joining this Ask Me Anything session. So excited to be able to answer your questions this morning.
Wonderful. So first of all, one of the first questions that we received from Camilla was wondering about the different quote unquote flavors of product management. It seems like she was wondering if there was such a thing as a business product manager versus a technical product manager, and what one would look for as they're looking for roles in each.
Yeah, so if you think about product management as a spider chart, right? Just like everyone is different and brings different skills, there are different product managers with different skills, or what I like to call as spikes, right? Different people spike in different areas. So for example, for some of the product managers that I've worked with, either at Amazon or at Google or at startups, who came from previous, like, let's say, investment banking backgrounds or finance backgrounds, well, you betcha they're going to be pretty strong on the analytics side and data side, right? So those are typically going to be your growth PMs, or I think you had also mentioned, Camilla, your business PMs, right? They're great at looking at business metrics. They're great at analyzing P&L statements, understanding, what's driving the biggest growth and top line revenue, so on and so forth. Now, another popular trope is also the very technical product manager. And those are often folks who may have been former software engineers or maybe systems engineers or even support engineers. And they're very technical. They can be hands-on with the product. They actually script. And so oftentimes you may find them building some of the most technical features that you have in a product portfolio. And of course, then everything in between. Not going to take up time this morning to go through all the different kinds. In fact, I do talk about those types in the real world product management courses. If you want to check them out on Coursera and listen to me go through the different types and skill sets required in depth. So what does that mean for you, right? Takeaway I would think about is, if you were to draw yourself as a spider chart, right? Think about all the skills that you might bring to the table, such as maybe outbound, interpersonal relationships, customer relationship development, being technical, being able to write technical requirements or iterate on the customer experience. Think about where your strengths are and how might they relate to your ideal product management role. And DM me a line once you've figured that out.
Thank you, Nancy. I think what you just said about figuring out where your strengths align and showcasing them lead nicely into another question that we received. Yamila asked, how can I demonstrate that I can lead if I have not yet been a manager on a team? I have experience and results that I can share, but I haven't been a leader yet. Do you have any suggestions of what I can do or what I can highlight?
Yeah, and in fact, actually, that's the whole premise behind actually me starting Advancing Women in Tech back in 2017. Because, well, look, it's hard, right, to expect someone to excel at something if they've never done it before. And look, if as hiring managers, we are only to hire people who have done the role before, well, you betcha we'd be fishing from a very small pond, and probably homogeneous pond as well. So some of the advice that I give to the own women on my team. And I'm proud to say that, we actually have close to a 50-50 ratio of engineering managers, women to men, my team so far, right? Is think about, ways where, for example, I'll give, a current woman I'm sponsoring on my team into a management role, right? She's never been a manager. And I would say there's definitely a lot of parallels that she shares with product because she's an engineer, right? It's going from engineer to engineering manager. And in that span, right, and we have her transition typically marked around 6 months or so, right, is that we'll give her junior developers to mentor, maybe fresh grads, maybe one more experience. And we'll see how she does, right? How is she at managing the project? How is she at building mechanisms to keep the projects on track? How is she coaching and developing these individuals, right? Are they becoming better because of her? And of course, we've also built a strong support structure around her with, for example, a seasoned engineering manager. We also have a head of engineering who, of course, looks over all of our engineering practices and makes sure they're standard. But I would say, if that's something you want to do, put yourself in a situation where you can readily do it, right? Because if you look at, what are the skills? So for example, if I were to go out and hire a manager of product management today, what are the skills that I look for? Right? I would look for someone who is organized because look, right, that would be, essentially by hiring manager, I'm building a layer under me, is I would want that person to be organized, to be, to have great repeatable mechanisms so that I can always know at any point in time, how is that project performing? How are the people on that team performing, right? And I would also want to know that that person's able to retain and also grow their talent, right? And so if you think about how those skills currently map to what you're doing, what are the skills that you're missing? And how can you put yourself in situations, even if it's not direct management, such as mentorship or maybe guiding or coaching, that helps you gain those skills?
Thank you, Nancy. So thinking about how you can demonstrate your own skills in the interview process, but you're also oftentimes thinking about what is the team like that I'm looking to join. So somebody wrote in that they're wanting to work on a strong team. Do you have any suggestions about how you can be learning about team culture during the interview process and what growth opportunities are?
Yeah, so strong teams, define what that means, right? Because that can mean different things to different people. So are you talking about technically strong? Because you can certainly find many of those teams, especially in the Silicon Valley, of, let's say, former distinguished engineers from Google, Amazon, Apple, you name it, right? They're all very technically strong. Or are you looking for a team that is business savvy, right? And those are very different things where perhaps the CEO or the founding team has exited multiple startups. They're quite, I would say, into the business metrics, for example. That's a very different skill set, as we talked about earlier. So what does strong mean to you? Write down those characteristics. Maybe it's a specific sector, right? Maybe you're looking for, some of the brightest innovators in health tech, for example, medical devices. It's a very different market from building B2B SaaS software, right? So understand what vertical, what are the characteristics that you're looking for. Best way to do that is just simply to write it down, right? And then just like, for example, I look for certain traits, as I mentioned, in the leaders that I hire, I will then also work backwards from those traits to come up with interview questions. So for example, if I'm looking for someone who's great at coaching and retaining people, I'll often ask them to walk me through an example of where they got someone promoted, right? Or where they helped one of their direct reports level up and walk me through that journey. Because look, it's going to be really hard to make up details if you haven't done that before, right? So again, going back to strong, right? List down those characteristics and create interview questions from those characteristics about, hey, what is your experience in the industry, right? What has been your previous track record of success, right? How do you recruit some of the top talent? And also, especially with startups and LinkedIn's these days, you can look up who's already at that company, right? Filter by company and look at their profiles and just simply ask yourself, do you consider that to be among your peers, right? Do they have, let's say, the right, pedigree or the experience or the track record that you're looking to hang your hat on or to be amongst?
Thank you. So it sounds like it's know yourself, do your research, and work backwards from what is needed to be able to demonstrate some pieces. So somebody wrote in, this is from Saba, that they are a chartered accountant who has worked in finance and audit for 5 years and then moved over to a PM role in construction. They have since moved and are looking to change industries yet again and work as a product manager in tech. Do you have any suggestions for how they can leverage their experience?
So I have not been a product manager in construction, so I'm not going to, assume that I know what you do day to day, right? But that would be a best place to start, is write down all the skills, all the activities that you do on a day to day. Then talk to a recruiter who hires for product management roles in the software industry, or I'm sure you have, a network, maybe contacts. LinkedIn makes it very easy for us to reach out to different people and talk to them about what they do on a day-to-day basis and what skills they leverage, and see how much overlap there is. And for the areas that aren't overlapping, well, they very directly become areas that you may want to apply yourself, right, and gain those skills that are needed for the new industry. And I'd start there.
Thank you. So now we're going to go into somebody who has a question who they have taken an interview, but then they did not end up getting the role that they wanted, but they have found that they still want to work at this company that they interviewed. Do you have any suggestions for how somebody might follow up and continue to express interest?
Yeah, so aside from the guidelines, so for example, Google, Amazon, I'm sure other companies also had this policy as well, which is depending on how your final round, or at Amazon we call it a loop, goes, we may recommend a certain period of pause, right? And the reason for that is depending on, again, what your loop finds out from your interview, we may say, hey, this individual may need or may benefit from taking 12 to 18 months, or maybe even 24 months to pick up some of the leadership principles or skills that we found to be a gap in the interview, right? Because if you interview someone, too soon after you discover those gaps and they haven't had a time to work on it, well, it does no one favors, right? Either the interviewers or the interviewee. So aside from that, right, and I know, big companies may not be able to share exactly, what were the gaps, but I would say do mock interviews, right? So for example, we highlight that in course 4 for the real world product management, where I mock interview candidates and I give them feedback on the spot about what they can improve and do better. And I would say there's tons of those opportunities within the AWIT community. I'm sure if you post in the Facebook group of mock interviews, practice interviews, the questions, for example, you can use some of the questions that I share in the course itself and just practice, right? As they say, practice makes perfect. And, the more you practice, the more you can get, for example, your STAR method down. And STAR stands for situation, task, action, result, right? And it's a great way to structure your thoughts. And again, the more you practice, the more structured and the more polished you are going to come off. And especially at a time when you will have, let's say, more job applicants going for the same roles, right? That's going to help you stand out at the end of the day. So practice, 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 and do tons of mock interviews.
Great. So we have had a question come through the chat, and I'll just remind everyone that you can ask your questions via the chat box, and we will be getting to them. Sit has asked, thinking about our Coursera specializations, what is the difference between the two? So we have one that's on product management and one that's on cloud product management. Can you speak a little bit more about what makes each one distinct?
Sure. So if you think about our first specialization, real world product management, it really goes through actually all of the elements that I would want someone, if I were, hiring manager at Google, Meta, Amazon, LinkedIn, you name it, tech company, to look for, right? So that's why it walks learners through the business, the technical, the strategy, the interview, essentially a 360 level, 200 course. I would say for the real world cloud product management, it actually takes learners closer to what does it mean to be a PMT at AWS, right? So, or Azure, right? I mean, I believe that a lot of the cloud product management principles and skill sets are quite transferable across different hyperscalers. But of course, in the lessons, we use AWS examples. So you can see a day in the life of a PMT at AWS. And also to mention, learners of that have also gone on to successfully pass the cloud practitioner exam. So if you are someone who's looking to transition careers into a cloud product management career and believe that, the specialization can be an extra boost in your candidacy, that is a great track to take. And it can be complementary to the real world product management specialization as well.
Thank you. So you mentioned earlier the importance of networking on LinkedIn, and I know that you receive a number of reach outs. Can you share what the most successful cold reach out folks do that allow you to say, yes, I will respond? Or what suggestions do you have for someone on a...
Be specific, right? Because if you're asking me to do work, well, I would like you to do work as well. Right. And I would say in this day and age, I'm sure as all of you have probably seen my LinkedIn, I wear many different hats, from AWS to being a venture capitalist, to being an advisor to startups, to sitting on, multiple boards. I don't have a lot of free time, right? I think that's just, truth in the pudding. So with that said, if you are going to make an ask, make it specific, right? Because if the ask is general, which is help me, mentor me, where do I start, right? Because again, going back to the adage of, if you're asking me to do work, I would like to see you do the pre-work, which is be specific, right? Ask me questions that are specific to my background and where I am. So for example, I've had calls where, for example, folks have jumped on asking me sort of, how do you start on a product roadmap? And my feedback would be probably not the best question for me. Right. I have not been a junior PM for many years now, and that would probably be a better question suited for someone who's maybe a senior PM or principal PM. I'm happy to talk about, for example, how do you scale businesses? How do you sell to, C-level executives, for example? So again, tailor your questions based on who you are reaching out to and what you are asking of them.
Great. So I have had a specific path where somebody has identified a role that they want to have eventually within AWS. So they are currently a product marketing manager at Amazon. Their experience is mostly in customer-facing go-to-market strategy, wanting to get into a PM role at AWS. What do you think of these two options? First, transitioning into a marketing manager at AWS and then into a product management role, or looking into transitioning into a product management role at Amazon retail and then into AWS as a product management?
Well, first off, +1 on being very specific with that question. Without having talked to you and knowing your exact background, it's hard for me to say one way or the other, because I don't know who, for example, would be your hiring manager in either of those teams. And frankly, I will say having a supportive leadership structure or manager who's invested in you makes all the difference. I would actually weight that more heavily than titles, because they will go out of their way to make sure that you have the right experience and gain the right skills. So never discount that. In fact, I would weight that very highly. So without, let's say, both things being equal, right? Going to a job family that is not product management just means that there'll be sort of 2 hops versus 1. So again, just something to think about. But really, I would say, let's go back to something that we talked about in the beginning of our AMA session, which is creating a spider chart for yourself, right? And your different skill sets and where you're strong in your skill sets. So for example, if you were to look at a PMT role in AWS, for example, and they're also, we don't make it easy because there are also different flavors of PMT. There's the PMT who works on internal tools, but there's also the PMT ES, which works on external services, which, for example, are the PMTs who are on my team at AWS. Right. And so those 2 roles have different skill sets. But actually, if you're already at Amazon, we do have a job directory where you can look at job leveling guidelines for each of the different PMT flavors that I just described, as well as the different levels. So what I would do is just, again, map where you are right now to that job leveling guideline, right? Discover what you're really great at Because I'm sure there are going to be, for example, outbound customer relations aspects that I'm sure you excel at given your current role, but also be very realistic with yourself on areas where you may have to, again, apply yourself or learn, right? Gain those skill sets that you may not have right now. And ask yourself, how realistic is that, right? Are you willing to sort of put in the time and the effort then to gain those skills?
You pointed to the importance of supportive leadership as you're joining the team and thinking about your career. How do you evaluate when you're making a career decision if a leader will be supportive?
Yeah, so my best comment on that is show, don't tell, right? So show me, which is tell me about a time when you've mentored or coached someone, right? And no matter how tenured or how experienced a leader, if that is something they truly care about, right, they will have a story, whether it's someone they mentored and didn't directly manage. If, for example, the manager is a bit, I would say, younger in tenure, right? Or if they're, very experienced, they should have tons of stories of, hey, this is how I helped someone become a first-time people manager, or this is how I help someone become a manager of managers from being a line manager, or this is how I, promoted one of my directs to becoming an executive. But regardless of the story, right, what I would look for is how involved were they, right? How much of an ownership stake did they take in that person's journey, and what specifically happened in terms of opportunities to that person that would not have happened had the manager not been there. So again, look for involvement and how much ownership they take in growing that person.
Fantastic. And so I will just do the time check right now and say that we are coming close to the end of this. So I will wait for a few more questions to come into the chat, but I will also go ahead and share some resources for you as we are all looking to improve our space as I wait for some more questions to come in. So first of all, I know many of you have come in to this conversation as those who have taken some of our product management courses on Coursera, where Nancy is the instructor. So she goes through many of these tips in our Acing the Product Management Interview course. And here is a link to that if you are wanting to do some learning in the upcoming weeks. Also, Advancing Women in Tech has a job board where we are posting partners' opportunities. So go ahead and take a look there if you are looking for a new role. And of course, follow Advancing Women in Tech on LinkedIn. We have an active community of over 8,000 women in product at that space. And that is a great place to be able to meet and network with others. And so let me just go over to this next question as I am here. Okay, here's a great storytelling question from Daniel. How do you go ahead and condense stories when you're doing a 30 or 40-minute interview call so that you are really highlighting what you want to tell without feeling like you're rushing through a story?
Yeah, so I'll share my hardcore way of how I did this. So in preparation for my own Amazon interview, I went through the 12 leadership principles. I think they're 14 now, but however many there are on the job site, that will have the latest information. I wrote down 3 to 4 star examples for each of them. So if you do the math, 3 to 4 times 12, well, that's about close, give or take 40 stories, right? So I had 40 essentially narratives going into my interview. I am an over prepper. So again, going back to do your mock interviews, make sure you do your homework, make sure you put in the time, right? Because if it's something you truly want, you will put in the time naturally. So with that said, when you write things down, and this goes back to, I think, Amazon's doc writing and heavy writing culture, is there's nowhere to hide, right? And I like that because when you truly put pen to paper of, hey, this is what I did, this is the steps that I took, this is the impact that I achieved, well, it becomes very clear to both you, right? Before you actually tell this story in an interview of what was your impact, right? Is it an experience that may not have been as, let's say, involved as you previously thought? Well, that will also come true in your writing. And what that saves you, and oftentimes, I do get this as both a bar raiser at AWS as well as a hiring manager, is stories that, may not have been as involved as I wanted them to be, right? So for example, if I'm looking for a senior product leader to come in and join my team, I look for someone who's, built businesses from the ground up. I look for someone who's built product roadmaps from nothing, right? Because you do need that think big and that vision. And so I ask oftentimes for situational stories or examples of how they've done that in the past. But oftentimes I end up getting examples that are light, right? And what I mean by light is it's not clear to me how much involvement the individual actually had as part of, creating that roadmap, for example, right? And if I hear that as an interviewer, well, that's how it's going to come across, right? Versus if you wrote that down, then you may be the first one to notice that before the interviewer does, which in your case as a candidate is always better.
Great. Well, Nancy, I know we are coming up on time. So I want to say on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts. And we appreciate your time. Want to say everybody on the call, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Go ahead and keep in touch with us. You can find us at advancingwomenintech.org, on LinkedIn, and on Coursera. The session was recorded, so we will be sharing snippets of top advice on our LinkedIn and also our Instagram channels, as well as within the community that we are building at AWIT. So thank you all for your time. Best of luck and all the best to all of us in the upcoming year.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Best of luck with your job, new job roles and everything like that. And happy holidays.
Happy holidays.